Welcome to part 2. Welcome to part 2. Now, you might be wondering, in the previous video, previous chapter of this video series. Now, in the previous chapter of this video series, I did allude to the fact that I do have a lot of my family are on the pro-Palestine march. Yeah, my mum's very pro-Palestine. Now, you might be wondering, did that ever rub off on me at any point? And if not, why not? Well, I suppose it has to be said that the first time I remember my mum getting actively involved in, the pro-Palestine movement was in the mid-2000s. I remember my mum saying that she spent much of the 90s feeling very politically defeated about things. We'd had a decade of Margaret Thatcher's government in the 1980s. Then for much of the 90s we had the John Major basically being Margaret Thatcher's successor, and just we'd gone through a long period of conservative rule. Margaret Thatcher had been in charge of the country throughout much of the 1980s, and then John Major took over, and I think my mum just felt very defeated by the 90s, politically. Now, I think during the Iraq War, that was when my mum got the war on terror, but specifically the Iraq War. That was when my mum got involved in politics again, and in proactive politics, in protest politics. And I think there was an inevitable kind of crossover once she got involved in the Stop the War coalition against the Iraq War. It was there was an inevitable crossover to the issue of Palestine and the Israel-Palestine conflict. And so that was around 2006 that she got really involved, enthusiastically involved in the pro-Palestine movement, in the Palestine solidarity movement. This was around a time when I was at university. I was studying in university. I was away from home, basically. I did join her on the the Stop the War, the Stop the War march against the Iraq War. The famous one that went all the way to London and went all the way to Hyde Park. But my mum got very involved in the pro-Palestine movement. I was very buried in my studies at the time, studying sociology, media, film. It was kind of a lot to take on, and whereas my mum was kind of invested in the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is a very complicated conflict. And she was kind of much more intimately and familiar with the conflict than me. And she did actually go to Palestine. Actually, she actually went to the Palestinian territory. She flew to Israel, and she spent some time in the West Bank with the Solidarity movement. And funnily enough, she was actually approached by an IDF soldier while she was there, who said, I'm a leftist, but I'm also a reservist, which means I've got to do this job. We're drafted to do this job. I don't agree with the occupation, but we're between a rock and a hard place here. And I don't agree with the fact that Israel is occupying the West Bank. I don't agree with the fact that your country, Britain, is occupying Iraq. That kind of thing. So I wasn't too familiar with it, but my mum did try and get me interested in it. Did try and get me interested in the issue. She got me a small pocket book, a book called, what was it called? We just want to live here. A Palestinian teenager, an Israeli teenager, and a likely friendship. Palestinian Amal Rifai and Israeli Odelia Anbinder are two teenage girls who live in the same city yet worlds apart. They met on a student exchange program to Switzerland. Weeks after they returned, the latest violent intifada broke out in the fall of 2000. 2 years later, Middle East correspondent Saik Temple encouraged Amal and Odelia to develop their friendship by facilitating exchange of their deepest feelings through letters. In the letters, Amal and Odelia discuss the Intifada, their families, traditions, suicide bombers and military service. They write frankly of their anger, frustration and fear, but also of their hopes and dreams for a brighter future. Together, Amal and Odelia give us a renewed sense of hope for peace in the Middle East in We Just Want to Live Here. Yeah, my mum got me this as a book as a kind of, in the hope of understanding the conflict and, the human element that's kind of caught up in the conflict. You've got this, Palestinian girl, a teenage girl who could be the best of friends, and they just, it's politics and sectarianism that make that impossible for them, and it shouldn't, that kind of thing. Book kind of seems like an anachronism now, given the more sectarian turn that the pro-Palestine movement has taken, of course.
What do you say about politicians that constantly reaffirm Israel's right to exist? Because people like me are constantly attacked by politicians for standing up for Palestine, and you are constantly defending the right for Israel to exist. My family is in Palestine right now, constantly under attack, and I'm hearing you say free Palestine, but also Israel has the right to exist. Don't be hypocritical. Don't be hypocritical and say free Palestine when you're also defending the right for Israel to exist. It does not have the right to exist. It does not have the right to exist. It's not your land to say it has the right to exist.
But it was a book that she hoped would help me understand a bit of the problem, a bit of the issue. Now, the first time I think I could say that I genuinely became engaged in any kind of pro-Palestine activism was in 2014. 2014, that was a year where I did become quite political. I was very, very angry about the fact we were back under a Conservative government, and Conservative government that was implementing all kinds of ruthless austerity policies that were impacting very harshly on the poor, the sick, the disabled, the lower rungs of our society, the most vulnerable in our society here in Britain.
The British Prime Minister has used a speech to the Conservative faithful to prepare the country for savage spending cuts. David Cameron says that tackling the UK's massive budget deficit will be difficult, but he's pledged to support those who help to get the economy going again. The ABC's Rachel Brown reports from Birmingham.
David Cameron got down to business, blaming Labor for mortgaging Britain to the hilt, and then he raced through his government's achievements.
Corporation tax cut, the jobs tax axed, police targets smashed, immigration capped. Look what we've done in 5 months. Just imagine what we can do in 5 years.
But David Cameron knows the country is anxious, braced for deep cuts in public spending to tackle its crippling budget deficit.
I wish there was an easier way, but I have to tell you, there is no other responsible way.
Now, 2014, like I said in my video series, The Right Side of History, I did talk about the fact that by the 2010s, I did become quite a radical left-winger. Now, because I was, at that point, we had a Conservative government under David Cameron. And he was enforcing, we just had a financial, we just experienced a financial crash. And he decided the best solution to the financial crash was to impose very, very ruthless austerity policies that impacted very, very severely on public services, on our welfare system, and which impacted particularly on the most vulnerable in our society: the unemployed, the sick, the disabled. As far as I was concerned, what the Tories were doing, what the Conservative Party was doing, what our Conservative government were doing, as far as I was concerned, what our Conservative government was doing was basically subjecting the most vulnerable in our society, some of the most vulnerable in our society, to a literal death by 1,000 austerity cuts. I was very angry and motivated about that, and as a result I joined quite a few left-wing groups on Facebook, which were, very vocally opposed to the Conservative Party. They were very vocally opposed to UKIP as well. Very, very kind of right on, if you know what I mean. And then inevitably this crossed over into the issue of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And 2014 was the year when the Israel-Gaza war kicked off. Hamas provoked the war. Israel retaliated massively with a bombing campaign on the Gaza Strip.
Israel launched its latest military offensive a week ago on July the 8th. Since then, more than 170 Palestinians have been killed, most of them civilians. At least 1,200 have been wounded. Over the same period, almost 800 Palestinian rockets have hit Israel. Another 200 have been intercepted. Some Israelis have been injured, but so far no one has been killed. Just how this latest escalation came about is inevitably the subject of debate. But a climate of heightened tension was created by the kidnapping and killing of 3 young Israelis in the West Bank and a young Palestinian in Jerusalem. The political environment was already poisonous. 8 months of US-sponsored diplomacy had collapsed, and Israel had condemned an effort by the 2 main Palestinian factions, Fatah and Hamas, to patch up their own bitter feud.
Much of the nuance of how the conflict started, of course, got lost to the images of the war. The amount of Palestinian casualties in Gaza. And among the dead were a lot of Palestinian children, it has to be said. The images looked ugly and horrifying. Moreover, and it looked disproportionate. This major bombing campaigns of a very vulnerable, densely populated strip. And moreover, it looked like, the way it presented, it almost looked like a kind of an eerie reenactment of the Iraq War, of the shock and awe tactics of the Iraq War. And so in a way it was kind of tugging on our Western guilt about Iraq. It's like, it's happening again, only with Israel acting as our proxy to do the same thing to the Palestinians we did to the Iraqis. We failed to stop them then, we're failing to stop it now. We have to raise our voices about this, if you know what I mean.
There was one specific moment that stood out above all others, and that was penetrating the 3rd floor of the Shiva Hospital, one of 2 floors dedicated to children. That's where I met Maha, terribly crippled by shrapnel that had penetrated her spine. That's where I saw this little 2.5-year-old with panda-sized, huge, suppurating, round, panda-like wounds that almost prevented her eyes opening at all. They were the consequence of a broken skull and a fractured nose. I can't get those images out of my mind. I don't think you can either, because they've been everywhere. They are the essence of what is happening in Gaza. Now, of course, Hamas, for its part, was throwing rockets into Israel, designed, ideally, as they would put it, to kill Israelis. But of course, Israel, courtesy of American finance, has invented the most brilliant shield, which is keeping absolutely everything out. And that's a big difference. The suffering is amongst the ground troops, mainly 20-year-olds, who go in and get killed. So when I last spoke to the Norwegian doctor who is one of those dealing with the consequences of this bombing, I asked him how many children have been wounded. They've registered 1,310. How many children dead? 166. But that number is growing all the time. That is what makes this something that every one of us has to confront. We have to know that in some way we actually share some responsibility for those deaths, because for us it is no priority whatever to stop it. Our United Nations, our government, our world is not that interested. The fact that you're watching this, that you've chosen to watch it, means that you're actually motivated to do something. And that, in the end, is the greatest hope the people in Gaza have.
And I saw no reason not to. I retweeted quite a few posts on Israel, on the Israel. I retweeted quite a few posts on the horrors of that 2014 war. Wasn't majorly conscious about the politics of it. I just felt this is wrong. This is, you know, it makes sense to oppose this. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. This is I retweeted this. This image, and there's a cartoon basically of a prison, kind of like the Pink Floyd The Wall type of prison, concert prison with barbed wire at the top, and a lot of missiles being dropped into it. This image best describes what is happening in Gaza. Bear in mind this is 2014. Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison. Even calling the action against Palestinians in Gaza a war seems lacking in description. A war implies some equality in combat. What is happening in Gaza is a massacre by one of the world's most powerful armies, abetted by the silence of Western nations. Fortunately, people are beginning to speak out worldwide, but as we speak out, let us do so without condemning a people in whose name a government may act. We must distinguish between governments and the people who are governed. We must reconnect with each other's humanity. The plight of the Palestinian people is ultimately the plight of the entire world, locked into endless conflicts which make no sense, which could be avoided, which constitute enormous abuse of power, which bring the slaughter of innocents. Let our hearts be moved by the desire to end war once and for all. Yeah. And I said, this slaughtering of children is inexcusable and despicable, and it's disgusting the West are complicit with it. That's what I said. And I got a comment from a friend actually saying to me, basically, believe it or not, this is a both sides issue. Yep, basically after I posted that, I did actually have a friend comment on one of my posts saying, believe it or not, this is a two sides issue. This is a both sides issue. You have no idea how bloody nuts Hamas are. And, you know, Hamas run the Gaza Strip. They believe in the extermination of every Jew. The nuts. Israel can't just ignore them as a threat. It's a shame we can't get rid of the leadership of both Israel and Palestine, because then the two sides could maybe get along, but their leadership is so nuts that that's just not possible. So that was a brief time when I was very kind of, you know, I echoed the far left anti-Israel sentiment. And, you know, like I said, it's so much easier to buy into when you believe this is just a kind of a condemnation of a government. When you don't understand that at a deeper, sinister level, a lot of this animus is against the idea of Israel even existing as a state, and the Israeli people having the right to live in safety on that land. When you don't understand that, it becomes easy to go along with, oh, it's just against the Israeli government. It's against the actions of the Israeli government and the Israeli military. You know, of course, there's nothing unreasonable or anti-Semitic about being against that. You know. Now, that was the last time I really engaged in any kind of, you know, social media kind of pro-Palestine activism. Although I did become a subscriber to Medical Aid for Palestine, but I'll tell the story of how that happened in general. It kind of happened along a mix of various other issues. Once ISIS came on the scene in 2015, 2016, it kind of compelled me to become much more informed on the whole Middle East.
Everything we're told by journalists and politicians is confusing and contradictory. Of course, there is no Mr. Surkov in charge, but it's an odd, non-linear world that plays into the hands of those in power. British troops have come home from Afghanistan, but nobody seems to know whether it was a victory or whether it was a defeat. Ageing disc jockeys are prosecuted for crimes they committed decades ago, while practically no one in the City of London is prosecuted for the endless financial crimes that are being revealed there. In Syria, we are told that President Assad is the evil enemy, but then his enemies turn out to be even more evil than him. So we bomb them, and by doing that, we help keep Assad in power. But the real epicenter of this non-linear world is the economy.
And that meant, that did lead me to watching more of the Empire Files, Adam Curtis documentaries about, documentaries like Hypernormalization that was mainly about Syria and Iraq. Bitter Lake that was about Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia.
The dynamic was one of manipulation. They understood how we saw the conflict. They presented their local group conflict, their civil war between groups that had been going on for 35 years. They presented everything in that dynamic. So they came to us and said, those people over there are Taliban. And we went, okay, and we went off and dealt with them. But actually we were dealing with their previous enemies, so we were just creating more enemies for ourselves. And you ended up in a downward spiral where, because everyone was manipulating us, we ended up fighting everyone. And then in return, everyone who fought us immediately became Taliban. The way that we decided whether you were Taliban or not was whether you were firing at us. Post-2001, whereas we've understood the conflict as good, bad, black, white, government, Taliban, they've understood it as a shifting mosaic of different groups and leaders fighting each other, effectively over power. And the currency of power in Helmand is opium. That's largely what the conflict's about.
And I kind of started to do a lot more reading on the issue of the Middle East. It also kind of somewhat swayed me towards donating to certain charities. I donated quite a bit to the famine in Yemen. The war, famine in a horrific famine in Yemen that was spurred on by the fact that Saudi Arabia was bombing the shit out of Yemen to try and destroy the Houthis. In hindsight, Saudi Arabia were doing the right thing, but at a horrific cost to the population. And yeah, so there was a certain degree of becoming aware of Israel and its occupation of the West Bank, and I watched a lot of Amazon documentaries on it. None of it particularly translated into me having a special animus toward Israel, because by the standards of the region, it was clear that Israel was one of the better states in the Middle East. It was certainly not as horrific as it certainly wasn't as bad as Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan or Iran. Israel had its problems, and it wasn't perfect, but there was no way it was as bad as Saudi Arabia, if you know what I mean. But nonetheless, there were things about Israel's occupation of the West Bank I was not happy with. And so, when I got adverts for asking for donations or subscription to medical aid for Palestine, it made sense to sign up as a subscriber. Why not? Basically, Middle East is a rotten region. I might as well do my bit to try and make it better. But I think I know why I didn't particularly become as motivated to a particular, the kind of hatred of Israel that most of the left have. Much of it kind of the outrage at Israel comes from the occupation, and the argument that the IDF IDF soldiers are particularly trigger happy when it comes to dealing with rioting Palestinians or or that kind of thing. Now, there's a big reason I think I was never swayed by that, and here it is. Around 2016, that was when people were becoming more and more aware of the situation in Syria had gotten wildly out of control. What had started as a civil war had kind of seen the rise of ISIS as a terrorist group that quickly managed to occupy vast swathes of territory in Syria and Iraq, and basically become its own horrific terror statelet, in which it enforced a barbaric caliphate at the same time as it was inspiring terrorist attacks here in the West. At the same time, because of the war, Europe was being flooded with refugees and migrants from Syria and from the Middle East in general. So there were a lot of videos that were produced showing some of the migrants coming in from that war were actually violent. Were actually had a disturbing propensity for violence, and particularly sexual violence, that was being caught on camera. There was video footage of them attacking women, skirt lifting women. There was the notorious Cologne sex attacks at the Cologne Cathedral on New Year's Eve in 2015. And watching this, it was very, very angering. And the main point being made, of course, was these people are from a culture that is horrific and that is nothing like the West, and that it is kind of Western politically correct liberal naivety to assume that you can just bring people from these kind of cultures here and they'll just assimilate to our Western civilized way of life. This whole all cultures are equal bullshit.
Yeah, your husband was on one of these rescue ships. Great, carry on.
Yes, and it was a really, really traumatic time for him. He was doing 3-week stint, and they were picking bodies out of the sea of babies, women. It was awful. But at the same time, he said they were processing men, adults in their 30s, who all had phones with ISIS stuff on the phones. They were being separated. When they were being handed over to the authorities with the information explaining that these guys, had all this on their phones and what their ages were, and they were just being processed through. There was nothing, they weren't being separated out. They just all went through with everything else. And it broke his heart because he was dealing with families who were in such a terrible state, with young babies who so clearly needed rescuing. And yet you had adult males that were pushing women and children to the back of the queue when they were being triaged to say, I've got a sore throat, I've got a cough, because they felt that they were just more important. And it's just an awful situation. And this was last year. This was happening. And there were hundreds and hundreds of women, children and men that were being picked out of the sea, but not all of them were refugees. And he came home heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken, because he's saying, I don't know how Europe is going to cope. But what more can we do than pass the information on and give the medical care to those who need it? I mean, the men that would push to the front, he would just push off to the side and say, go away. But they were so unhappy with the fact that they weren't being treated first. And it's a cultural difference that is coming across as well, I mean, what kind of human being pushes a woman with a baby aside to say, deal with my cough?
And, a lot of these compilation videos were about kind of getting it through to people. That's just not how the world works, and that's not how a lot of these migrants operate. A lot of these migrants are from very, very savage, misogynistic regions of the world. And one of the very, coupled with these clips was a particularly horrific footage from Afghanistan of a lynch murder that happened in 2015. It's called the murder of Farkhunda Malikzada. I've seen the footage. It is horrifying, and I'll basically describe it here. I'm not going to show the footage. Let's see. But here's what happened. And basically watching this footage was kind of instrumental in I think in some ways it shaped my politics, if you know what I mean. Or rather, demoralised, any kind of, okay. The murder of Farkhunda Malikzada was committed by a Muslim mob in Kabul, Afghanistan on 19th of March 2015. Malikzada, a 27-year-old Afghan woman, had been involved in an argument with a street vendor over his practice of selling amulets when he publicly accused her of burning the Quran, attracting a large group of people from the Shadu Shamshira Mosque. Or was it the Shado Shamshira Mosque? I'm not too sure of the pronunciation. Shortly thereafter, she was publicly lynched, with several members of the mob bludgeoning her and then running her over with a car which dragged her for nearly 100 metres. Subsequently bringing her near the Kabul River, the mob, while yelling the Takbir and anti-American slogans, took turns further bludgeoning her corpse before setting it on fire, with some of the assailants ripping off parts of their clothes to use for kindling, as Malikzada's clothes were soaked in blood and her corpse would not stay burning. In the aftermath of Malikzada's lynching, public opinion was overwhelmingly against her. A number of Muslim clerics and Afghan government officials stated that she had desecrated Islam in order to gain American citizenship, and a police investigation was also launched to determine whether she had truly burned the Quran. When it was revealed that she had not done so, 49 people were arrested in connection with her death, and protests erupted throughout Kabul. 3 men were sentenced to 20 years in prison, another 8 men were sentenced to 16 years in prison, and a 20-year-old man who had fabricated his birth certificate in an attempt to present himself as a legal minor was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Additionally, 11 police officers received 1-year prison sentences for their failure to protect Malikzada from the mob. Malikzada's murder was condemned by the United States and the European Union and drew renewed international attention to the issue of women's rights in Afghanistan. Later that year, the Solidarity Party of Afghanistan sponsored the construction of a memorial for her in Kabul. Farkhunda was an observant Muslim who wore a veil, a hijab. At the time of her murder, she had just finished a degree in Islamic studies and was preparing to take a teaching post. Her name means auspicious and jubilation in Dari. Farkhunda had previously been arguing with the Mullah Zainuddin in front of Shadu Shamshira Mosque, where she worked as a religious teacher, about his practice of selling amulets. During this argument, Zainuddin reportedly accused her of burning the Quran. She responded, "I am a Muslim and Muslims do not burn the Quran." Hundreds of angry radicals flocked to the shrine upon overhearing the mullah's accusation. Police arrived and attempted to lead Farkhunda to a local precinct building 1 mile away, but she refused, asking for a female police officer to accompany her. The mob was able to drag Farkhunda away into the street, where they knocked her to the ground and began beating and kicking her. More police arrived, firing warning shots into the air and temporarily dispersing the crowd. They moved her into the Shadu Shamshira Mosque in an attempt to shield her. As the crowd grew in size and rumours that she was working with Americans began circulating, the mob attempted to storm the shrine. Police hoisted her onto the roof of the building in an attempt to rescue her from the crowd. But Farkhunda, struck by stones and planks thrown by the mob, suddenly slipped and fell into the crowd. The mob dragged Farkhunda into the street and beat and stomped her. She was bludgeoned with sticks and rocks outside the mosque, then placed into the road and run over with a car, dragging her body almost 100 metres. Police offered no resistance and directed traffic around the scene. The mob then dragged her body into the nearby bank of the Kabul River, took turns stoning her and set her on fire. Her body was soaked in blood and would not burn, so the crowd ripped off articles of their own clothing to ignite and maintain the fire. The mob shouted the takbir during the lynching, including after they were certain Farkhunda was dead. Farkhunda's parents said the killing was instigated by the mullah Farkhunda had been speaking to. According to Tolo News, he loudly accused her of burning the Quran in order to save his job and life. An eyewitness said that the mob was chanting anti-American slogans while beating Farkhunda. The mob was captured on video, accusing her of working with Americans of being a French embassy worker. Yeah, a lot of the footage of the lynching I saw. A lot of the lynching I saw the footage of. The beatings, the attacking her with rocks, the scene where the police tried to disperse the crowd, the bit where they tried to get her onto the roof and she was swept off by a plank because the crowd were just that determined to kill her. The whole thing about dragging into the road and having her run over, and then hitting and then throwing her with stones by the river and then setting her on fire. A lot of it was captured on film, on smartphone camera, which was kind of the irony of it, really. It was the you had 21st century technology recording an event in the 21st century that looked like it belonged in the dark, savage days of, biblical times. Alright. On the 22nd of March, a number of women dressed in black carried Farkhunda's coffin from an ambulance to a prayer ground and then to a graveyard in Sheikhana, a northern neighbourhood of Kabul. This was a marked departure from tradition, which holds that such funerals are typically only attended by men. At the end of 2015, it was reported that Farkhunda's grave was half finished. Right. The whole thing was filmed, and what's disturbing is how much of it was filmed, how relentless, how long the Lynch murder went on for, how determined the crowd was to kill her off, in the most sadistic and depraved way imaginable.
A human rights group in Kabul staged a reenactment of the brutal beating of Farkhunda Malikzada, who was killed by an angry mob 1 year ago. On March 19, 2015, the 27-year-old student of Islamic law was pummeled to death, and her body was burned after she was falsely accused of destroying a copy of the Quran.
I would defy anyone who claims to be a liberal or left-winger to watch that footage. Western leftist, if you know what I mean. To watch that footage and still hold any conviction in their former beliefs. Because leftists, they tend to believe, we can do without borders, or the borders don't really matter. We can probably do without borders. We should welcome all the world's immigrants. All cultures are equal. Peaceful coexistence and all that. Peaceful coexistence can work. And of course, when it comes to the police, guns aren't the answer. Police are too trigger happy. They should try and arrest or try to reason with or remonstrate with criminals rather than, pulling the gun and shooting them. If you watch that footage of what happened to Farkhunda, all those beliefs are guaranteed to go to die. As you realise just how fucked up the culture of Afghanistan is, and just how normal it seemed to be for this crowd to just turn into a homicidal mob that the police had no chance of pacifying. It just would never occur to any of us to beat to even smack a woman in public here in the West is, to invite, social ostracism, as if you're a man, you're a woman beater. But this is a mob who felt it was acceptable to beat this woman to death, essentially, based on a rumour that she'd desecrated a Quran. And they didn't stop until she was dead, essentially. And the thing that most struck me was just how ineffective the police were in that situation. The Afghan police were. All they could do was fire warning shots into the air, which meant that they, I think they had very, very small arms on them. They weren't very heavily armed. They were very lightly armed, if you know what I mean. And the moment you fire a warning shot into the air, you've wasted one of your bullets, as it is. And you're dealing with a mob of people who are just determined to kill this innocent woman, Farkhunda. And I actually just bring to mind what Yardina Schwartz said in Ghosts of a Holy War about the Hebron massacre. There was no IDF to protect the Jews of Hebron. Just as there was no IDF to protect Farkhunda in this situation. If there had been, they would have had, huge rounds of ammunition. They probably would have been able to shoot most of the crowd. Of the righty crowd that was rounding on Farkhunda. They would have been able to do that. They would have been able to shoot most of the crowd dead. And of course, the international community would condemn them for that use of excessive force. But they would have been completely justified, I think, to kill everyone in that crowd as long as Farkhunda was saved. And the lynching of Farkhunda shows what can happen when you don't deploy sufficient lethal force against a murderous, homicidal, rioting crowd. And that's exactly why I am not easily swayed when I see propaganda against the IDF for using excessive force, because it's the Middle East. The way that violent, murderous mobs operate in that region, you cannot begin to understand from the safety and sanctuary of the West. They are not easy to pacify. And this is a big reason, I think, why I was never particularly swayed by the whole business of the 2018-2019 March of Return controversy, where there was the March of Return protests in Gaza, where crowds of Gazans tried to reach the perimeter gates of between Israel and Gaza. They tried to enter Israel. Some brought families with them, and reportedly the IDF snipers on duty did their job, which was to not allow these not allow the Gazans to enter their territory, and so they opened fire reportedly.
And let's be clear, what is Palestine supposed to do? What are Palestinians supposed to do when in 2018, thousands of Palestinians in Gaza marched peacefully to this fortified perimeter fence that Israeli snipers have authorized themselves to shoot to kill? And that's exactly what they did. They massacred over 200 peaceful demonstrators, medics, press, journalists, clearly marked press, disabled people in wheelchairs, and children.
Which of course invited a lot of outrage, but I was like, well, but to me, this is after a period where Europe had allowed in huge numbers of migrants from Syria and the Middle East in general, and they'd all, and huge numbers of them had presented massive security concerns. There was a Tunisian jihadist among them who did the Berlin truck attack. In Sweden, of course, the 2017 truck attack was committed by an Uzbek migrant who came in 2014. He was actually on a deportation order in the months before he did the attack, but it wasn't enforced in time. There was very, very strong intelligence that he was in league with ISIS. In fact, he had tried to actually fly to Syria to join ISIS, only to be sent back. But nothing was done to stop him. And then one fateful day, he hijacked a truck and drove it into a crowd in Sweden, killing 5 people, including an 11-year-old girl.
Ideologically is why someone took a truck and slaughtered innocent people, some on honeymoon, some married for 40 years. Why someone took a truck and slaughtered an 11-year-old in the middle of Stockholm. So I will not sit here and let you tell me, Sabrina, no, I will not give you the airspace to tell me ISIS is not such a big thing to worry about, because believe me, sat here having watched people slaughtered about 4 miles up the road, it is not a threat that we can ignore.
This is what, a few jihadis are kind of brainwashed and conditioned to do to just ordinary Westerns. Now, if you factor in how Gazan society, Palestinian society brainwashes, Palestinians from a young age to think that the greatest glory in life is to stab Jews to death, then you have an idea about the kind of the protection, the responsibility to protect your own people that the Israeli soldiers have.
October was a rough month in Israel. Palestinians carried out some 65 various terror attacks that killed 11 and injured nearly 150 people. And the terror is likely to continue.
You actually can see that in the past month there were tens of thousands of posts telling people to go out and kill Jews, teaching them how to stab, how to twist the knife, where exactly in the body should be the stabbing.
That type of incitement led the IDF to confiscate equipment at the Al-Hurriya radio station in Hebron. But it's social media that Israeli leaders blame most for spreading hatred against Jews and encouraging terror.
And so the IDF had to stop this crowd from breaching their security, from breaching the gates. The reports were garbled. The one thing that stuck in my mind more than anything was someone kept on pointing to the proof that the IDF are particularly child murderer types, by citing an instance in which a particular baby who was brought to the march for some reason, I think had been left in a baby carrier or something, had died out of inhalation of tear gas. And immediately I said, well, hang on a minute. People don't deploy tear gas as a lethal weapon. That's supposed to be a kind of non-lethal means of crowd dispersal. It's unfortunate that a baby was killed by this, but whoever fired the tear gas canister was not trying to kill anyone, and especially not trying to kill a child. But it happened. You're not going to convince me that's murder, though. It's not. It's not murder.
Can I interject really quickly? I find it very bizarre that it's Colonel Kent who is stating this, since he was embedded in the Israeli army during the Great March of Return. And I want to ask you, sir, was it your idea to shoot Palestinians and aim to maim them as they peacefully marched for their normal and basic rights? This is something that you have boasted about before, bear in mind.
I wasn't embedded in the IDF then or at any other time, but what I would say about that is that the Great March of Return was part of a Hamas plan to do what it did on the 7th of October. And some of the people who were so-called protesting on the border had maps on them that showed direct routes to the nearest settlements and equipment so they could carry out the kind of massacre that Hamas did itself on the 7th of October.
This is what we are all so sick of.
There were weapons, there were means of breaking through the border. All of these things. It was the first attempt to do the 7th of October, which failed.
Look, sir, you can use all the Queen's English that you like. It's not going to cover the truth of the matter of the fact that Zionism is working on a press release.
You know, and that was kind of, I think, the moment I realised that I was not really... I'd woken up to just how savage the Middle East can be, and how, you know, responsibility to protect in the Middle East can mean take no chances. And as it happens, there was a lot about the March of Return that turned out to be very, very fishy indeed, and not just the, you know, there was a lot of kind of theatre involved in it, to try and make the Palestinians look like victims. But, you know, I wasn't convinced, and hindsight has proven that the March of Return was largely a reconnaissance mission for a future October the 7th attack. We know that now.
So welcome to the Parade for the Return, the latest big show organized by Hamas. Every day between 10,000 and 30,000 Muslim Arabs will participate in this smokescreen operation. Buses with garlands pick up in the heart of the cities the participants to the fair, which must take place along the border near a buffer zone that Israel has announced to protect at all costs.
أنا كلمت بوجهها اليوم للشباب بقول لهم ما تخافوش ولعوا خوشوف قد ما تقدروا حتى العجائز إحنا لازم نولع الخوش جوا ونولع الكوشوك عند اليهود نولع الكوشوك ونخليها تدخل عليهم تحرقهم حريق تحرق الصهاينة الكلاب الأنجاز الوسخين.
Israel has warned no attempt to cross the security fence will be tolerated. So you have to blind the enemy with mirrors and smoke. The Great March of Return became the March of the Tires. Indifferent to the high health risk, activists and their accomplices will ignite thousands of tires along the border, causing a black and carcinogenic smoke, which will destroy the environment for tens of kilometers. Where are the ecologist protests? The goal of Hamas is twofold: take advantage of the smoke to try to cross the border and commit a terrorist attack inside Israel. Failure to do so, it remains to provoke the soldiers in the hope of counting the dead who will make the front page of the Western newspapers.
لا تتركوا هؤلاء اليهود يعيثون في الأرض فسادا من دون أن تتحركوا ومن دون أن تكون لكم صولات وجولات ضدهم. وكذلك لما كان بنو قريظة اليهود قد نقضوا العهد مع النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام كان موقف النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام معهم أن استأصلهم عن بكرة أبيه.
يلا رجال يلا رجال يلا كلنا واحد الله أكبر هينا جوا يا اخواننا هينا جوا رضينا هينا جوا رضينا الله أكبر هينا جوا رضينا هي قلبي هي قلبي هي قلبي الله أكبر يلا ادخل 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 تعالوا تعالوا الله أكبر الحمد لله يا اخواننا تم العبور شارق البريج تم العبور شرق البريج الله أكبر لله الحمد الله أكبر.
So that's one reason why I suppose I've never been fully swayed by the anti-Israel reports. You know, who knows what excessive force is in the Middle East? Because, you know, excessive force might have actually come in handy when it came to the lynching of Farkhunda. And it would have been completely justified, as far as I'm concerned, to use excessive force and kill everyone in that crowd who was trying to kill Farkhunda, if it saved Farkhunda's life. People who are trying to kill Farkhunda do not deserve to have their lives respected whilst they're engaged in trying to kill someone. Now, as I said, the thing that I find kind of strange and baffling is that if I think of about a particular demographic that someone could easily frame as being a demographic of evil, depraved child killers, it would be Muslims. It wouldn't be Israelis, it would be Muslims. You know. When I think about the children in Europe and Britain who've been killed by terrorist attacks by Muslim extremists, you know, the children killed in the Manchester Arena bombing, or in the Nice truck attack, or 11-year-old Eba Akerlund who was murdered in the Sweden truck attack. It makes me sick, and it seems strange that so many of these attacks, so many of these murdered children have been forgotten by the public, and yet somehow this notion of Israel as being the IDF being uniquely child killers has still somehow persisted. Like the most grotesque case I ever heard of child murder within Islam is a particularly sick honour killing that happened in Saudi Arabia of a 5-year-old girl by her father. Oh, okay, here's The Independent. Saudi preacher who raped and tortured his 5-year-old daughter to death is released after paying blood money. A celebrity Saudi preacher is accused of raping, torturing and killing his 5-year-old daughter has reportedly been released from custody after agreeing to pay blood money. Oh my God. Fayan al-Ghamdi had been accused of killing his daughter Lama, who suffered multiple injuries, including a crushed skull, broken back, broken ribs, a broken left arm, and extensive bruising and burns. Social workers say she had also been repeatedly raped and burnt. Fayan al-Ghamdi admitted using a cane and cable to inflict the injuries after doubting his 5-year-old daughter's virginity and taking her to a doctor, according to the campaign group Women to Drive. Rather than getting the death penalty or receiving a long prison sentence for the crime, Fayan al-Ghamdi served only a few months in jail before a judge ruled the prosecution could only seek blood money. Al-Bawaba News reported the judge as saying blood money and the time the defendant has served in prison since Lama's death suffices as punishment. Fayan al-Ghamdi, who regularly appears on television in Saudi Arabia, is said to have agreed to pay $31,000 to Lama's mother. The money is considered compensation under Islamic law, although it is only half the amount that would have been paid had Lama been a boy. Despite Saudi Arabia's famously strict legal system, Women to Drive say fathers cannot be executed for murdering their children in the country. Equally, husbands cannot be executed for murdering their wives. Formal objections to the ruling have been raised by 3 Saudi activists, and the Twitter hashtag #AmalLama, which translates as I am Lama, has been set up. Local reports say public anger over the settlement is growing across Saudi Arabia, with authorities planning to set up a 24-hour hotline to take calls about child abuse. Fucking hell. And they say that Israel is a uniquely child-killing society. You know, it's sickening. It's such a fucked up region of the world. But, you know, even after that, I wouldn't, you know, condone what Brent Tarrant did and go and, you know, shoot a mosque full of Muslims in New Zealand. But you got lunatics in the West saying it's okay to kill Israelis in cold blood because of a war operation that Israel has to engage in. But where has the strength of argument? Where's the strength of feeling about Israel killing children come from? Well, I'm going to have to do some backtracking now. It largely comes from, well, obviously children have died in this war. You know, bombs have hit residential areas that have not been evacuated. And we've seen video footage of children being pulled out of the rubble. Some being pulled out unconscious, barely alive, brought out delicately, and you know, you see it in Twitter footage, and you know, you're watching. You can only hope, as a watcher, that they come out alive, saved, resuscitated somehow. You know, I got behind the idea. You know, I felt there had to be a. You know, I knew there was going to be a war over this. There had to be a war over this. There was no avoiding a war over this. Israel had to go to war with Hamas to destroy Hamas. I knew there was a good chance a lot of civilians were going to be killed in the process. I just had to hope my best that they would have to take their chances. All I could do was pray for their chances, I suppose. They would have to take their chances, and hopefully, if they were lucky, enough of them would survive this war whilst Hamas were eliminated, hopefully. But you know, the fact they had a leadership like Hamas did not exactly bless them with the best of luck at all, really. But you know, people were still already prepared to describe the IDF as baby killers because of this, because you know, some children were killed in the bombings inevitably.
Because when you have a population that was taught from early childhood age to hate Jews, Christians, and pagans, you need some serious re-education.
You're Iranian American,
Yes.
I believe.
Yes, I am.
When was the Islamic Republic of Iran founded?
1979.
When was Gaza occupied by Israel?
The very first time. 67, yeah.
So, can we do the maths together? 12 years before the Islamic Republic of Iran existed, Israel was oppressing, occupying, dispossessing the people of Gaza. So your argument makes no sense.
Were there any terrorist organizations at the time?
The PLO was considered a terrorist organization by the entire Western world.
All right, so was Hamas there?
Hamas did not exist till the 1980s.
Exactly. My point is, after the Islamic Republic came, it became chaotic because the Islamic Republic has started to use the so-called innocent Palestinians for their own
so-called innocent Palestinians? You don't think Palestinians are innocent?
Not all of them.
Because but what about the 17,000 children who were killed?
They're doing the
17,000 children were killed. Were they not innocent? Were they not innocent?
Who's responsible for that?
Israel, who dropped the bombs on
Hamas
them.
is responsible. Hamas is responsible for hiding in hospitals and making tunnels underneath
those
hospitals.
So when children are shot in the head by Israeli snipers not responsible for that?
Look,
it's a simple question.
Here's the problem.
When Israeli snipers shoot Palestinian children in Gaza in the head, as eyewitness testimony and doctors' testimony proves, that's not the fault of the Israeli snipers.
Her death is just one of nearly 15,000 children killed in Gaza since the war began in October, according to the UN's Human Rights Office. Her name is now a rallying cry around the world for what the United Nations calls atrocities taking place in Gaza. But her death has been shrouded in mystery. Her name is Hind Rajab, and she was just 5 years old when she was killed with her family trapped in a vehicle. Her face spread across social media, her name shared online, put on posters, emblazoned on a banner unfurled during the Columbia University protests, renaming their academic building Hind Hall in her honor. In tonight's Prime Focus, ABC's Marcus Moore reports on Hind's death and retraces the moments right before she died, on the phone with medics, pleading for help.
The killing of Hind Rajab, the death of Hind Rajab, was a very, very confused one. All I'll say is, personally, I don't know the facts about what happened with Hind Rajab. I just put it down to a fog of war situation.
لحد الساعة تقريبا 8 مساء من يوم الأحد يوم 29/1 هو بتواصل الصليب والهلال الأحمر مع الطفلة هند. هي داخل السيارة وتقول أنا خايفة وأنا متصابة، وأيضا كذلك تم استشهاد أو استهداف الطفلة هند. خرج الهلال الأحمر يوم الأحد يوم 29/1 عشان يجيب الطفلة هند، وتم اللي هو استهداف للإسعاف. تو إحنا لما جانا الخبر إنه انسحبوا اليهود من منطقة تل الهوى، توجهنا على الأرض ونروح نشوف الشهداء والصبايا وبناتنا. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل، حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. لقينا الشهداء مرميين في السيارة كلهم 7 أشخاص. طلعنا على الإسعاف اللي راح يجيبها إسعاف الهلال الأحمر، لقينا بس عظم، ما فيش أثر لهم الشهداء الله يرحمهم. الإسعاف لقيناه فحمة، ما فيش فيه له أي أثر، بس فحمة. هاي نحن جينا هان على الشفاء عشان نكفنهم إن شاء الله، وربنا يتقبلهم الشهداء وربنا يصبرنا إن شاء الله.
But my good instinct tells me that the IDF are not going to use 350 bullets just to kill one child, which suggests to me that she was sadly killed in the crossfire of a battle between IDF and other combatants. That's what necessitated the excess use of firepower by the IDF to take out various militants. But yeah, I mean, obviously the death of Hind Rajab strikes a tragic note because, she was 5-6 years old. Could have had a whole life ahead of her. Although, when her grandfather came out and described her as being martyred, that led me to think, led me to suspect a kind of a Hamas connection to the family of, well, why are they described as martyred? Unless, I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe martyred is just, the general euphemism. I mean, there are Jews in the West Bank who describe Baruch Goldstein. I mean, there are extremist settlers in the West Bank who consider him a martyr. He committed his massacre, then he was beaten he committed his massacre, he was beaten to death after by the mob. I don't know, it doesn't all add up to me. And then, of course, the South Africa began its genocide case against Israel. And it was not long after that various claims by doctors from Doctors Without Borders, a French NGO called Doctors Without Borders. Well, technically it's called Médecins des Frontières, but translates in English to Doctors Without Borders, and that's how it's more commonly known. Various doctors there, particularly a Mark Perlmutter, a Jewish doctor actually, in America, came back with claims that they'd seen bodies of Palestinian children in Gaza brought into the hospital who had been sniped in the head deliberately by IDF snipers.
Why is it that yesterday 45 doctors who served in Gaza this past year, 45 doctors, published a letter in which they said that every day in the hospitals, they had to deal with children who were shot in the head or in the chest. It wasn't shrapnel. It wasn't indiscriminate bombing. It was children who were targeted in the head and the chest. Why is that, Mr. Kemp, Israel's favorite cheerleader with his pom-poms?
This was the claim. And I touched on this a bit in my video, in my video series on Mossab Hassan Youssef. In fact, part 5 of that video series ended up being me going heavily into that issue, to the point where it was barely a video about Mossab Hassan Youssef at all. It was just completely derailed by that. Trying to address the claim and address why I'm suspicious, why I'm not entirely believing of the claim. And I think really I have to kind of go over it again. If I think back, because the thing is, it was my video series on Mossab Hassan Youssef it involved talking a lot about how Mossab Hassan Youssef argues and defends Israel, and why he defends Israel. And my video series did concede that sometimes he did drop the ball in the defense. Like Cenk Uygur brought up the claims of Mark Perlmutter in that about the children being sniped in the head.
They shoot, according to 100 American doctors that returned, they're shooting the Palestinian children in the head. An extraordinary amount of headshots. They've burned them alive, and now they're starving them in northern Gaza.
Mossab didn't really respond to the claim. He didn't really kind of say, no, I know the IDF, they don't do that kind of thing. But then, what can be said in response, if you know what I mean. And to a degree, that was kind of why my video took so long. Because that was why my video was fixated on that point, because I felt, well, I need to defend that point now. I need to actually address how true it is, or how not true it is, or how ambiguous it is. Can this rest in the realms of being comfortably ambiguous enough that I don't need to defend it? I don't need to really consider it a charge against Israel, because who knows, fog of war, that kind of thing.
It's a big situation in Gaza. All of us are heartbroken for the death of the children of Gaza. All of us. That includes Israel. Israel considers what's happening in Gaza a tragedy. It's a tragedy made up by the terrorists that you sympathize with, that you want to validate and legitimize.
You do.
You self-proclaim, just like Mahmoud Abbas, just like Yasser Arafat, just like all the Palestinians who have been feeding on the pain of the Palestinian children. You are a parasite, a bottom feeder. So don't play the game now that your fight is for the children in Gaza. This is not your fight. You know who's fighting for the children of Gaza? The IDF. That is killing Hamas. That is uprooting Hamas so the children of Gaza can have their freedom after 36 years of slavery. Those are the ones who qualify to speak on the topic, not you sitting in your comfort.
I do think really my video series was just, I think in that instance what I did was I basically went to, I looked for articles that debunked it, and I quoted the articles that debunked it. I read out aloud the articles the debunkings, and I thought, job done, they've done it for me.
Meet Mark Perlmutter. He's a physician who travelled to Gaza on a Palestinian-American Medical Association mission in April of 2024. He's also a propagandist who has done the rounds on CNN and CBS News defaming Israel with damaging lies.
All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
Almost exclusively children.
You're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper, and they're dead center shots. And so no sniper hits a child, and I'm talking toddlers, twice by mistake.
According to Perlmutter, the victims he saw were definitive evidence of expert Israeli snipers purposely targeting Palestinian toddlers for murder. But he has no way to determine the perpetrators or their motives. His claims raise far more questions than they answer. He only saw children in the hospital when they were already dead. How was he able to ascertain the identity of the shooters, the circumstances of the shootings, and the victim's position when they were shot, based only on the size and location of bullet holes in the body? Why would a professional army squander its top military assets, trained snipers and ammunition, to target children and toddlers instead of adult combatants? Why would the world's best snipers capable of dead center shots require additional shots to confirm their victims' deaths? If expert snipers aimed so perfectly in dead center over the heart, why would they need to adjust their angle or squander extra bullets in targeting a separate part of the body? If victims were to be found with shots to different areas of their body, wouldn't a far more likely scenario be that they were caught in the crossfire of a combat zone? None of this seems to have occurred to Perlmutter, who apparently is more interested in demonizing Israel than telling the truth.
And in hindsight, I feel like what I did there was just I acted like a kind of kid with his fingers in his ear, saying, "Don't believe you. I don't want to believe you. I don't have to believe you. I'm just determined not to hear you out or believe a word you say against Israel." If you know what I mean. I don't think it was a very mature way of handling the issue, and so I feel like I've got to kind of revisit it and properly. And
so the crime of genocide, as it was defined by Raphael Lemkin, and then in the context of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, is about intentionally seeking to eradicate a group in whole or in part through a series of acts, including killing, creating conditions that make life impossible. But the key aspect of this is the intention to eradicate that group in whole or in part. Now, this is an allegation that is being advanced against Israel, I think, extremely maliciously. It's certainly an inversion of reality, and it does something very disturbing, because it is in fact blaming the victims of genocide of the very acts that were perpetrated against them. And I don't just mean the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, but I mean the victims of the atrocities on the 7th of October. Because when Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other terrorist organizations and many supposed ordinary civilians crossed the border on the 7th of October from Gaza into Israel, they committed indisputably acts of genocide. They recorded these on GoPro videos. They sent them around the world through social media. And the atrocities that they committed, the slaughtering of families, the torture of families in front of each other, gang raping of women, mutilation of individuals, in particular sexual mutilation. All of this was very openly with the intention of targeting Jews because they were Jews, and so that intentional aspect of the acts of genocide was met there. So it's an inversion by blaming the victims of the very crimes that were perpetrated against them. But it's also based on a whole series of misinformation of what has been happening on the ground in Gaza over the last 12 months. And this is certainly in part because of what we have seen over our television screens. The images coming out of Gaza have been horrific, but they have not been presented in any way in their proper context. Now, part of that context is that no information comes out of Gaza that is not controlled by Hamas. Hamas still controls Gaza absolutely. Israel has been engaging Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists through various different geographical areas in Gaza, but it has not maintained control of any of those sectors. And what everyone outside of that part of the world needs to very much bear in mind is that no journalist, no international organization, no humanitarian, no doctor is able to report what is happening on the ground in Gaza in any way that Hamas, an internationally prescribed terrorist organization, do not approve of.
So basically what I've done is I've looked back on the clip of him being interviewed on France 24.
So you went to Gaza from the end of March through the first half of April, more precisely at the European Hospital, which is located in Khan Yunis at the southern end of the Gaza Strip. You've been over the past decades to war zone, areas were hit by earthquake, ground zero after 9/11, but you say you never saw what you saw in Gaza. So what exactly did you see there?
Well, the overwhelming difference between the other trauma zones that I've been to is that almost exclusively the injured were not military combatants, but rather civilians. And indeed, we didn't see one military combatant the whole time we were there, either around alive and well and walking or as a patient.
I must have a look. Can I look this guy in the eye as he tells the story of, seeing children sniped in the head? The challenge is, can I look in his eye and say, he's lying. He's a malicious liar. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't look in his eye and see a malicious liar.
There were shrapnel injuries, and in particular, there were sniper injuries. I personally saw 2 children that were shot twice, once in the chest, right over where I would put my stethoscope over their heart, and once on the side of the head. No child gets shot twice by mistake.
I couldn't look in his eye and see a malicious liar. Or, I saw... What I saw was a very kindly man. Who was sincere when he said that he'd held, these children's lives in his hands and he could only do so much to save them. I couldn't view him as malicious. I couldn't view him as an amoral or evil man. So I had to kind of rethink, what do I believe? And but it's kind of, this is the key point here. It's it's his claim upon which rests the claim that the IDF aren't just killing children as there's not just children dying in this war as a result of collateral damage. There is deliberate instances of IDF. The whole the thing of sniping children. It's no ambiguity. They're targeting children and shooting them gratuitously. Why? Well, I guess because for the same reason that South Africa says. They're trying to kill the next generation. They're engaged in the genocide. They're under orders to kill children, maybe.
You're saying that they were probably targeted, that this was not an accident, but by design. Obviously, the Israeli Defense Forces are saying that they're not targeting civilians, and especially not children. Do you maintain your allegations that what you saw was not an accident?
Absolutely. No child gets shot twice by mistake. We're all, the surgeons that were there were adept at high velocity bullet wounds. The shot to the chest completely evacuated the chest of the child. Everything between his shoulder blades in the back was missing. there were definitive high-velocity bullet wounds. We have x-rays that were printed in the New York Times and republished in the Haaretz newspaper in Jerusalem in Hebrew, copies of the x-rays of which the metadata proves it was real because it was challenged whether it was real. This is a bullet in the head of a child.
Or maybe the IDF has been recruiting soldiers who are very much like Baruch Goldstein, who have that kind of extremist view of, you know, that the Gazans are a savage, irredeemable threat, future threat to Israel, and if we kill them now, they won't be a threat to us in future. You know, October the 7th has kind of vindicated that view anew. And you know, if you think about the number of reservists who've been called into the IDF, you know, it sounds outlandish that, you know, you got soldiers that evil and twisted and that malicious and sadistic, but when you consider the huge numbers of recruits an army gets in a population, the chances that a few of those recruits might be psychos with evil intent, there's a probability there that can't entirely be dismissed. There's a slim possibility and probability that they can't be dismissed. It can become likely if you pool enough members of our population, you will end up with the occasional psycho in there. Okay. Psychos who just happen to have made, you know, sniper duty.
There are 4 types of people who join the military. For some, it's a family trait. Others are patriots, eager to serve. Next, you have those who just need a job. Then there's the kind who want a legal means of killing other people. James Barr is one of those. He made sniper. Trained hard. 2,000 rounds a week. And with every shot, he's taught to visualize the base of a man's skull through his reticle. The sweet spot where the medulla meets the spine. Visualize that puff of pink mist. Finally, he's deployed to Iraq. He's put on Overwatch. All day long, he stares through a scope at civilians. Women. Children. Day in, day out. For 2 long years, without ever once being cleared to fire a single shot.
So maybe in the context of October the 7th, it can make sense. The feeling that someone in the army has decided these people hate us. It's been exposed what UNRWA has done in terms of brainwashing Palestinian children to kill Jews as a cause of glory. If we take out Hamas now, the next generation of Hamas who've been brainwashed, you know that 30 years later we're still going to be dealing with the same problem unless we kill that younger generation. That younger generation is going to grow up and to become the next generation of Hamas who will do another October the 7th against us in future. I'm not going to let that happen. Why not? And someone might think, well, the only answer is to kill as much of that younger generation now as possible. As much as I can get away with, basically. Possible, plausible, maybe. Worst case scenario, yes, it is possible.
The wounds that we saw were definitively high velocity. They weren't pistol caliber rounds. And one of the child, the father told me, the father or uncle, I didn't get the ID, but the attending male with him said that he felt the boy ripped out of his hand, looked for him, 10 meters later saw him lying on the ground. When he saw him get shot the second time, he didn't even know he was shot in the chest. He brought him to the ambulance. The ambulance brought him to us. When I rolled the kid over looking for other damage, there were no organs between his shoulder blades. His heart was gone, his lungs were gone, his spine was gone. That only happens with high velocity bullet wounds.
Now, the thing is, does he necessarily have to be lying? Well, not necessarily. He worked in the hospital. He was presented with the bodies that were brought in and told that they were sniped in the head. Now, for all he knows, these children who he was presented with, who were killed, who were shot, maybe they were shot by stray bullet fire in a shootout. Maybe they were shot by Hamas militants or Palestinian Islamic Jihad militants or other militants or rival gangs. You know, what the war has done has caused something, has probably caused something of a breakdown of Gazan society.
And it's important to step back. You hear these words, these terms, legal terminology in particular, like genocide being advanced. It's for a purpose, and that purpose is unfortunately steeped in misinformation.
Coleman Hughes, I think it was on Joe Rogan's podcast, he said that even if we are to believe Hamas's statistics about civilian casualties, that they're at a lower rate than most modern wars. Is that right?
It's absolutely right. We can break down those casualty figures. I mean, a lot of people are quoting this 40,000 figure. Again, we have to understand that that's Hamas propaganda. It has in part been compiled from what have been referred to as other media sources. Andrew, this has included Hamas circulating Google documents around the population of the Gaza Strip saying, insert your martyrs here. So the methodology behind these supposed numbers has been debunked repeatedly in a number of academic studies. But what these numbers also don't tell you is the division between civilians and combatants. Israel has said with certainty that it has confirmed upwards of 17,000 terrorists have been eliminated. And those are conservative figures because Israel is a democracy, its institutions are held to account in the state, through the judicial system, through very active NGOs. So the IDF and various government organizations or departments don't put out information they haven't verified, triple checked. And so I think those estimates are probably conservative, but we're dealing with at least 17,000 terrorists that have been eliminated. These statistics don't take into account the natural deaths that would be expected over the course of a year. Across 2 million people, that's going to be significant. They also, very importantly, don't indicate how these people have died. So we know that Hamas have been shooting their own civilians, even from the very start of the war, while Israel was seeking to evacuate civilians from areas so that it could better target Hamas. Hamas was shooting them in the street. They were also bombing fleeing civilian convoys that were going according to the Israeli maps that have been set out for protected humanitarian areas.
There is that nagging question, why would IDF waste, their best snipers and sniper ammunition on shooting harmless kids in the head? Doesn't entirely make sense, if you know what I mean.
They definitively used famine as a weapon of war to support the genocide that your new foreign minister says doesn't exist.
Could he be lying to embellish what's happening? Very probably. He certainly must have seen children killed in this war, killed in bombings, killed in explosions. Not killed directly, but if he wants the war to stop, then of course he would. If he's invested in wanting the war to stop because he's seeing the casualties of the war, then maybe it would make sense that he might lie and embellish a bit to accuse Israel of committing the worst crimes. And, embellishing in a way that it removes the ambiguity about whether it's collateral damage or it's deliberate targeting of children. I mean, the thing is, like I say, I have autism, and I have support workers and family who kind of work to ensure that I got the diagnosis of autism, who played their part in, telling the doctors, how my autism affects me on a worse day, if you know what I mean. And, I have support staff who sometimes help me fill in forms. There is sometimes an element of embellishing involved in that. Sometimes they will lie a little, embellish a little to try and make my condition sound the worst it can be, because they say I'm trying to ensure you get the benefits I believe you deserve, which means sometimes you got to telling the truth sometimes doesn't cut it. Sometimes you got to lie a little bit, and it might be the same thinking with with him in terms of we've told the truth about what Israel is doing to the Palestinians for decades. It's not gotten results. Maybe it's time to embellish and lie a little. We're only exaggerating the truth as it is, which is that children are being killed in this war.
There were shrapnel injuries, and in particular, there were sniper injuries. I personally saw 2 children that were shot twice, once in the chest, right over where I would put my stethoscope over their heart, and once on the side of the head. And no child gets shot twice by mistake.
Okay. But, worst case scenario, he says he's seen 2 children killed in this way. 2. By the metrics of warfare, that's actually quite a low number. It's also such a low number that it maybe does incline me to think, well, maybe he is telling the truth. Maybe if he was embellishing, he would have made up that he saw at least 5. Unless, of course, it's a conspiracy to kind of, to tell this story. Unless it's, he conspired with fellow doctors to tell this story. But like I said, he's not necessarily a witness of who shot who. Or the context in which the shooting happened. So what else is there? It's like he's only a reliable witness so far. He's not a witness to the crime. He's not a witness to the crime scene. He's only a witness to the aftermath. And it's there that, of course, his bias against Israel plays into his judgment. The judgment he leaps to, which is the IDF have done this. They've done it by sniper fire. They've done it deliberately because they're a particularly genocidal army. I'm convinced that's what the IDF are.
To support his false claim that Israel deliberately targets children as part of a genocide, he grossly minimizes the numbers of Hamas combatants, claiming that they make up just 0.01% of Gaza, in other words, only 200 people. Perlmutter, who has a Jewish father and Jewish surname, grotesquely exploits his connection to Judaism to endorse vicious anti-Semitic tropes. He calls Zionism the moral equivalent of Nazism and definitively not Judaism. And here's how he characterizes Israel's fight to destroy Hamas.
This battle that's going on in the Gaza Strip is not a Jewish versus Islamic battle. It's nothing more than a land grab.
And yet, Mark Perlmutter is one of the doctors cited in Firouzeh Sidwar's New York Times op-ed that effectively accuses Israel of shooting children as a matter of policy. If these purported experts had a real case, then why would they have to lie?
Now, it might also be that if Doctors Without Borders, the particular NGO he works for, and the journalists who, the New York Times presented the evidence of the overall story put together by him and his fellow doctors about, a wave of sniper attacks on children, a deliberate, sniper kill shot on children. Then maybe he's obliged to go along with the lie. He's obliged to go along with the, because he has to make his NGO sound credible. He's not going, otherwise he's kind of jeopardizing his job, isn't he, really?
There were definitive high-velocity bullet wounds. We have x-rays that were printed in the New York Times and republished in the Haaretz newspaper in Jerusalem in Hebrew, copies of the x-rays of which the metadata proves it was real because it was challenged whether it was real. This is a bullet in the head of a child.
What do you make of, I think it was a New York Times article about lots of babies being shot in the head. Did you see that?
That's been thoroughly debunked. I mean, those photographs have been shown to be fake. Apart from anything else, if you are shooting anyone in the head at that range, you don't get an X-ray of an intact skull with a bullet embedded in it. I mean, for anyone who has seen the images of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who was eliminated only a few days ago, it's clear what the intro and exit wound of the bullet that took him out has done to his skull. So, I mean, this is another perfect example, though, of the blood libel that is being propagated, even in what was formerly considered to be respectable media. I remember years ago when a Swedish newspaper, I believe it was Aftonbladet, published a story that Israel was stealing Palestinian organs in order to sell them on the black market. I mean, another story that was completely false.
He has to kind of make his NGO sound credible, because his NGO depends on charity. It depends on being a reputable charity. So he has to, if he doesn't lie, then the NGO doesn't make the money it needs, that he believes it needs to keep going in order to do what good work it can do in this combat situation. So if an NGO puts out a claim that's outlandish, he has to agree with it. He has to support it. But let's explore the worst case scenarios here. If we have a gunman in the battlefield who is just killing children gratuitously, then the imperative, you would think, would be, no matter what, get that soldier off the battlefield. They're causing gratuitous death to Palestinian children without cause. Then they have to be removed from the battlefield. You cannot allow someone, that they have to be get them off the battlefield. But this is where we hit the problem of how the Palestinians in Gaza have completely undone themselves. Because in order for, the government of Gaza to be able to make a complaint to the Israeli government saying, you've got a rogue soldier on your battlefield, you need to investigate them, find out who they are, remove them from the battlefield because they are killing our children gratuitously. That would require you to have a credible, decent government that's actually able to make a complaint like that and be taken seriously. And Hamas are not that, because that, complaint like that sounds like a complete joke from a government that decided to invade Israel on October the 7th and burn families alive for no reason in a single day on October the 7th. It's like that they're in no position to make, human rights complaints or be taken seriously.
يابا انا قاعد اكلمك من جوبا بسيم. افتح الواتس تبعه قول له وين شوف كيف القتله شوف كيف قتلك بيدي يابا ابنك قتل يهود هاي دخلوا فلسطين يابا الله اكبر ربنا يحميك يا رب ربنا يحميك يابا ربنا يحميك يابا اكلمك من جوال يهوديه قتلتها وقتلت جوزها الله بيدي الله اكبر ولله الحمد الله اكبر ولله الحمد يابا افتح الواتس شوف كيف قتلت يابا افتح بتدفع عليك واتس قول له وين بروح ربنا يوفقك بالسلامه يابا عجبة بسيم يابا والله 10 قتلت 10 بيدي يابا على ايدي اعطينا امي يما يسميك يما طول الليل 10 بيدي يما 10 بيدي قتلت.
The Palestinians have kind of undone themselves in terms of having a government that will credibly advocate for them and their plight. And they have to take certain blame for that, for the mess of this situation. Now, personally, the reason I'm skeptical of this story is largely because of the South Africa case.
one of the things I'm hearing everywhere all the time from people around me, it's written on walls where I live, is that Israel is committing genocide. What do you say to that?
This is probably the biggest blood libel that Israel is currently having to contend with. It's by no means a new allegation, but it is entirely false. It certainly gained traction more recently over the last 12 months, not in small part because South Africa, of course, has brought this allegation of genocide against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Now, that was pretty calculated. The allegation was advanced because it forms a sort of legal hook by which South Africa was able to bring Israel to the International Court of Justice. It's a technicality, if you will, that it bases the jurisdiction of the court on the fact that both Israel and South Africa are party to the Genocide Convention.
They definitively used famine as a weapon of war to support the genocide that your new foreign minister says doesn't exist.
I keep thinking, what the events he's reporting on are long after that case was brought forward. I keep thinking the last thing that the IDF would be expected to do would be to decide to give credibility to the case by deciding, sod it, let's start killing children. That'll give ammunition to South Africa we don't need. It's like, I think it's the last thing that it's the last thing that would be in the interest of the IDF to do, but it'd be incredibly in the interest of NGOs who want the South Africa case to succeed. They'd want to, it's exactly the kind of embellishment you would think some people would come up with to support the South Africa case. So that's what kind of lends me to suspect something here. I've got to admit, like I said. I've got to be honest, that's what makes me skeptical of it. And, I've seen documentaries in which the IDF do not come off well. Which they come off as far from the most moral army in the world. Sandra Jordan, who presented Unreported World, has done several documentaries in which have shown the IDF in quite a trigger-happy light, in the light of being quite a trigger-happy army that, have fallen short of their reputation for chivalry, if you know what I mean. The IDF is not perfect, but even then, I find it incredibly hard to believe this. And sure, to a degree I don't want to believe it. I'm invested in not wanting to believe it because it upsets my moral worldview in this. I have a bias. I can't disprove it, I can't prove it. If it was true, could it change my mind about the war? Could I swallow the bitter pill that, okay, while this war is engaged in, one or two particular snipers who are invested in just gratuitously killing are going to have free reign? Could I live with that? I guess I could. I'll admit it, I probably could. It could all end if Hamas surrenders anyway. This war has to be won. The conditions in which these horrors happen needs to come to an end. And that only comes to an end when Hamas are defeated.
It's a very dangerous zone. Israel is looking from the outside. And also, who said that Israel is only responsible for the killing of Gazans? Mostly Hamas responsible. First of all, for taking human shields. Second, their booby traps. How could you differentiate the death that it was caused by an airstrike or by a Hamas death trap? How do we know the difference?
Well, yeah, but
in war, I would make people die. Listen to me. All this moral, Pierce. No, listen to me. All this dilemma, you're going with your whatever morality. This is war. In war, people die. You need to wake up to this reality, accept it. Stop this denial. We are in the face of savages who hijacked an entire society. This is a very difficult war. No other army can do the job, and I'm not willing to risk thousands of lives of foot soldiers to deal with this type of savages who hijacked the entire society. 100,000 people could have died. Israel is doing everything they could. Don't reduce it to the point, do you have statistics? Who cares?
But let's consider something. And I think this is kind of the thing. When I quoted, those Twitter threads in which various kind of armed, firearms experts debunked the article, debunked the claims, and said that doesn't make sense, that doesn't add up. I know my guns, I know my sniper rifles. What's being described does not sound credible or possible. And that particular photograph of the that huge bullet in a child's skull, that looks faked up to me. Dr. Mimi stated she worked in Khan Yunis from August 8th to September the 5th. The IDF announced on August the 9th, 2024, they were beginning another ground operation in Khan Yunis. Major combat operations by the IDF were completed on August the 30th. This means Dr. Mimi was on the ground in Khan Yunis for the entire operation, according to her claim. Dr. Mimi Syed provided these pictures to the NYT and stated, I had multiple pediatric patients, mostly under the age of 12, who were shot in the head or the left side of the chest. Usually these were single shots. The patients came in either dead or critical and died shortly after arriving. There are two issues with her accusations provided in the photos and statements. 1. Accuracy. 2. Velocity and penetration. Even at sea level with high humidity, the M855 fired from an M4 will remain supersonic beyond 500 meters. The M855 green tip ammo is designed to penetrate body armor and defeat barricades and cover. However, this comes at a cost in accuracy. An M4 shooting the M855 round does an average accuracy of around 4 minutes of angle. That is roughly a 4-inch shot group at 100 yards. At 200 yards, the shot group expands to 8 inches. At 300 yards, it increases to 12 inches. The average diameter of the adult male head is about 8 inches. The size of a child's head will vary based on age. Hitting a 4-inch to 8-inch target at greater than 100 meters with an M4 is a challenge on the range with stationary targets. In combat conditions with moving targets, it would be almost impossible. The M855 travels too fast at that range and is designed to penetrate. It would easily, without question, press completely through a child's skull at those ranges. This leads to the next question. Were the X-ray images the result of ricochets? Well, no. When projectiles travelling that fast strike another object, they tend to deform and tumble. We would see that represented in the X-rays. We do not. Further, over 190,000 IDPs fled Khan Yunis prior to the start of their combat operations on August the 9th. Now, when they made their claims about, sniper rifles, I am not a weapons expert at all. But I think since making that video, I've become a bit more clued up as to what they meant, what they were talking about in terms of the plausibility of the sniper shot. Because there is one point where Dr. Mark Perlmutter says that he said he saw a 5-year-old, kind of an infant who had been shot twice by sniper fire. And that's when someone kind of said, that's not making sense. That sounds like a gratuitous waste of bullets, and it doesn't sound very practical. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, in order to understand that, I think we have to look at a particular film called American Sniper. Let's see. Where's it gone? American Sniper, 2014 American biographical war drama film, directed and co-produced by Clint Eastwood. Based on a memoir of Chris Kyle. The film follows the life of Chris Kyle, who became the deadliest marksman in US military history, with 255 kills from 4 tours in the Iraq War, 160 of which were officially confirmed by the Department of Defense. Kyle was celebrated for his military successes, but his tours of duty took a heavy toll on his personal and family life. Let's see. Years later, on February the 2nd, 2013, Chris said goodbye to his wife and family. He left in good spirits to spend time with Eddie Ray Ruth, a veteran suffering from PTSD, at a shooting range. Chris was killed later that day by Ruth. Obviously had a PTSD episode. Crowd stood along the highway for his funeral procession and his memorial service. Yeah. It's tragic, really. He was killed on his return home. The thing is, there's a particular scene where Chris Kyle is on sniper duty, and I think this is kind of the key. I think people need to understand. I think people just do not understand. A lot of people react to this war as though they've never heard of a war before. They've never heard about what the tactics of war are, and they think, oh my god, you actually use snipers to kill Palestinians? Has anyone ever done that in war before? Ever since sniper rifles have existed, snipers have been used in war. There's a film, a World War II movie called Enemy at the Gates, which actually shows the Battle of Stalingrad during World War II between Nazi Germany and the Soviet forces. Stalingrad was an absolutely brutal battle. It was a battle in which the Soviets they lost 20 million of their soldiers in that war, in that battle for Stalingrad. The film Enemy of the Gate shows the horrors of Stalingrad. It focuses specifically on a Soviet sniper who makes the point of making sneak ambush attacks on Nazi officers, and you're shown at the beginning how he operates and how he times his shots.
First, you should wait till there's an explosion. Do you notice you? A little.
and it's ugly. You know, because you're seeing basically he's sniping unsuspecting soldiers who have no way of knowing or defending themselves. You know, there's no fighting chance. They're kind of killed seemingly in the moment, unprovoked. But, you know, that's what you got to do. You've got to kill the enemy, basically. And over the course of the film, the Germans employ a rival sniper to try and take him out. And it's just, this is kind of how it is in war. You've got, you know, snipers have an advantage when it comes to taking out the enemy. And you know, it's not all face-to-face combat. There's an element of you know, subterfuge, sniping, war by stealth. And, you know, snipers, they play an important part often in protecting the rest of the troop. You know, the sniper kind of, you know, keeps watch of a, you know, particular street or area in the battlefield. And takes off any threats that appear to be, you know, pose a threat to the main troop. There's always there's often snipers involved in war. In the Lebanon Civil War, there were Palestinian snipers, there were Phalangist snipers, and ultimately, when the IDF got involved, there were IDF snipers. The IDF is going to employ snipers in the Gaza Strip. Probably Hamas are doing the same thing. Very probably, in fact. And, you know, American Sniper is about the fact that, you know, the American forces use snipers as well. And Al-Qaeda had snipers too. Who aimed to pick off American soldiers. So, you know, you got snipers, your enemy's got snipers. Hopefully, you know, the snipers are very good at spotting enemy snipers and taking them out.
Shit! Shot came from the east.
And there is this particular notorious scene, which, you know, it's kind of very illustrative, where he's on sniper duty. His troops are kind of, you know, at one end of the street, and he's kind of making sure that the street is as safe as possible. He's from a vantage position, unseen, and he sees a mother and her young boy, and the mother sneaks the boy a grenade.
Hold on, I got a woman and a kid 200 yards out, moving towards the convoy. Her arms aren't swinging, she's carrying something. Yeah, she's got a grenade, she's got an RKG Russian grenade. She's saying to the kid. You said woman and a kid? You got eyes on this? Can you confirm?
Negative. You know the ROV. Your call.
Man, they fry you if you're wrong. They send your ass to Leavenworth.
And urges him to go to the soldiers at the end of the street and throw the grenade at them. and the boy starts running, and the guy's got to kick into action. It's like, well, I've got to shoot that boy before they... my job, what I've sworn to do is uphold, I've sworn to defend my country, which means, of course, I've sworn to defend my fellow soldiers. That boy, he's a child, but he's a threat to my soldiers. He's armed, he's posing a danger to my soldiers. The soldiers rely on me to protect them. I've got to snipe that boy. I've got to shoot him. And people think that's horrible. But consider, if he doesn't shoot the boy, and he throws a grenade, and the grenade successfully takes out some of the soldiers, there'll be surviving soldiers as well, who will retaliate and open fire, and they will shoot the boy anyway. That boy's going to die either way. So for him, it's a case of, well, if I shoot the boy now, I've saved the rest of my troop. That boy's not turning back. I've got to do it. I've got to defend my men,
Fucking evil bitch.
Nice shooting, Tex. Hell of a call. Roger that. Good looking out, Navy.
Get the fuck off me.
There's no question about it. There's no choice in the matter. I have no choice. Now, of course, that does not sit easy with any of us, and it doesn't even sit easy. And it doesn't sit easy with him, but it's what he's got to do. It's his combat training kicks in. It's what he's got to do. Now, I suppose for me watching the scene, obviously what I'm thinking is, well, look, I get he has to shoot the boy. He has to neutralize the boy. He has to neutralize the threat of the boy. But can't he shoot to wound? Can't he cripple the boy rather than kill him? Can't he kind of aim at a particular limb on the boy? The boy, he's been kind of, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's kind of been raised to do this by his mother. That's the kind of the liberal thinking kicks in, obviously. But I think that's kind of the point, really. If you're a sniper dealing with a moving target, as it was illustrated in many of those replies, if you're a sniper dealing with a moving target, and it's a small moving target, if it's a child, then, and you've got to treat it as though you've only got one shot, because a sniper rifle is a very laborious process of reloading a sniper rifle. And he's got to track the boy at the same time, so he has to make the shot count. Now, if he aims for a smaller limb, he's likely to miss completely. If he aims for the foot or the arm or something, he's likely to miss completely. The only dead sure shot is the dead center shot. So that's what he has to do. He has to snipe the kid in the chest, basically. And then he's got to reload. That's what he has to do. It has to be a kill shot. It's a kill shot or nothing. If it's not a kill shot, then that boy is going to blow up his fellow troops. Now, but that's exactly what a lot of the skeptical kind of comments were about, is saying, well, look, you're saying that you saw a kid who was shot twice by a sniper rifle. That doesn't make sense. It's hard enough to hit an adult. Sniping a relatively stationary target, that's easy enough. Moving target, that's where it gets harder. Moving child target, even harder. Targeting specific parts of the child's body is, you're getting into the realms of the impossible now, and doing it with managing to get in 2 shots on one, sounds very unlikely. It sounds pointless, for that matter. Why would a sniper do that? The practicalities of it don't add up. Add up to the reality of how a sniper rifle works. But I think the clip is also illustrative of the fact that there's a truth a lot of people don't want to admit about the Gaza Strip, which is that maybe, just maybe, the IDF actually do have to deal with a number of jihadis who are children.
In Gaza and the West Bank, nearly 10,000 teachers and school administrators employed by UNRWA belong to Hamas-dominated unions, which call for the destruction of Israel. UNRWA is financing school curriculums that glorify terror and suicide bombing. Children are being inoculated with the belief that any and all means possible must be used to reclaim Palestine.
UNRWA students openly parade in the streets and call for Israel's destruction. All of this occurs in plain sight, within the watchful eye of UNRWA teachers. These students are between the ages of 8 and 10 and have already received military training.
Who are children, but they're radicalized, and they've been trained in UNRWA schools. I mean, there's footage of UNRWA schools where they've trained 10-year-olds, and this is just kind of part of their education. They're trained to be combat ready by the age of 10. They're trained to know how to move as a military, how to dodge and maneuver as a military, how to operate, ammunition as a military, how to jump through fiery hoops, how to be prepared for combat conditions and being ready to kill. They're all dressed up to be Hamas already. They're like mini Hamas. They're literally combat ready at that age. I mean, some of the footage you see really does kind of inspire a lot of mixed instincts in me. Like, there was one clip I saw of a Palestinian girl, had her hair up, but she had kind of an armband and, a headband, Hamas headband, and grenade and a gun in her hand. She said, "I'm going to kill all you, you Israeli Zionists," and all this. And part of you's thinking that girl is a legitimately psycho threat to, she's a she poses a lethal threat. But there's that protective instinct of thinking, look, someone please get that gun out of her hand before she hurts herself with it. Who the bloody hell's raising these kids to be killers and jihadis and terrorists? I mean, when I was 10 years old, I couldn't fight for toffee in a street fight. You know, I had 2 left feet as a footballer. I was hopeless. You know, I was hopeless. You know, I wouldn't have had a clue how to operate on a battlefield. Barely could manage myself in a scrap in the street or the schoolyard, for that matter. You know, I couldn't fight for toffee. But but these kids are trained to be effectively a killing machine by the age of 10. And to have no conscience about it.
هذا نرمى على اليهود حجار ونذبح اليهود إن نقتل اليهود وندافع عن وطننا.
So, this factors into it. The fact of the matter is, in this part of the world, you are going to have to sometimes deal with child jihadists who pose a threat, and they have to be considered a clear and present threat to your soldiers. That's just the reality.
Don't pick it up. Don't you fucking pick it up. Son of a bitch. Fucking drop it.
Now, obviously, in this kind of this post, the disillusioned world, the modern world, of course, and disillusioned modern world, of course, a lot of people, a lot of leftists would say, well, why should Chris Kyle have had the right to snipe those children? Weren't those children in the right to kind of take up arms to overthrow an occupier and oppressor? America had no business being in Iraq and invading the country and all that, Didn't the Iraqi children, didn't the Iraqis have the right to take up arms and, launch a violent insurgency to drive the Americans out? Well, let's see if they... Well, it's funny how they don't say the same about the Irgun in Palestine, driving the British out. No one seems to take their side because the rules are different when it comes to Jews, aren't they? Well, thing is, a soldier, a sniper like Chris Kyle, cannot afford to think that way. He can't afford to think, well, maybe they have the right to attack us and drive us out. The bottom line is, my duty is to make sure they don't kill my men. My men depend on me to defend them. If I let that boy blow them up because I got sentimental about not killing the boy, even though in the resultant firefight the soldiers would have to kill the boy anyway, my men would lose faith in me. I'd be a liability to my unit, and to my country, my men, the oath I took. I've got to do the duty. I can't think about what is motivating them to do this and whether their motives are right or not, whether their grievances are legitimate or not. I have to defend my men, which means I've got to kill that boy if he's posing a threat to my men. Of course, the argument is always comes down to, well, why can't the Americans just leave? Well, at that point, the film kind of makes it clear, just what was happening to Iraq at that point, and that the Americans couldn't just pull out because it would have completely destabilized. It would have taken away what little stability existed in that country. The American invasion, it had begun to destabilize the country. Al-Qaeda in Iraq had moved in, Zarqawi had moved in, and his vile militants had moved in, and they were just terrorizing the population. They were determined to start a holy war with the Shia population of Iraq. They were blowing up Shia mosques. If America had pulled out, the chaos would have been far worse. The chaos was bad enough with the Americans in, and the Americans, if they pulled out, it would have gotten far worse. And we see this because there's a particular agent of Zarqawi in the film. It was a really nasty piece of work. He terrorizes the local population, local neighborhoods of Iraq, with a battery-powered drill as his tool of choice, if you know what I mean. His weapon of choice.
Hold. Go!
تكلم معهم تموت معهم على شيء كلمتهم كلمت معهم تكلم معاهم تموت معاهم يلا.
If any of the Iraqis are seen or rumoured to be speaking to the Americans, he tortures them with the drill. He has drilled people's arms off. And there's a particular horrific scene where he actually drills... he actually does drill a child's head in. He actually kills the child with a drill. It's painful, and it's like... This is what happens to you if you deal with the Americans. So the Americans have to stay to make sure that they can get rid of scum like him and stop scum like him from terrorizing the population. It's there's no easy options for the Americans. But of course, the reason why people think that it's an easy option is because they think, well, why were we even in Iraq in the first place? Why couldn't, Iraq is, halfway across the globe from us. It's in the Middle East. Was Iraq really ever a threat to mainland America in the way that Al-Qaeda was? Not really. It may have been a threat to our regional interests in the Middle East, but not to America. We could have withdrawn. We could have not gotten involved. If we pulled back, it wouldn't necessarily threaten us here in America. It would have just been, the region would have gone to crap, but we would be at a safe distance. America would be at a safe distance. I say we because, I suppose, well, we in Britain helped America in the war, I suppose. I mean, we the West, if you know what I mean. That's the defence. Now, the fact of the matter is, people don't seem to forget that Israel does not have that option. Israel doesn't have the option to withdraw to a safe distance. There is no safe distance. Gaza is right on Israel's doorstep. Hamas are Israel's immediate neighbours, just like Hezbollah are their immediate neighbours in the north. Israel is surrounded by hostiles, but Hamas particularly. They've shown what they're capable of on October the 7th. And they've taken hostages. Israel has no choice but to take Hamas out. There's no retreating to a safe distance. The danger is at Israel's doorstep unless Israel takes that danger out. So Israel has no choice but to go in, which means it has no choice but to send in snipers. And those snipers often might have no choice but to take out jihadists of any age group. And ISIS recruiters and Hamas recruit, jihadis as young as 8. That's just the miserable truth. And the IDF have to, employ snipers to defend their troops, because the troops do have an important mission in Gaza. They have to go door to door to try and rescue the Israeli hostages. Israel can't just abandon the hostages to the mercies of Hamas, as it were. They have to go street to street to find the hostages, and they need every soldier they have, which means that a sniper on sniper duty has a duty to do whatever it takes to protect the troops on the ground. Every troop matters, because this is an incredibly difficult urban combat situation. And the numbers matter for success. The operation has to be done quickly. Speed is of the essence if they're going to rescue the hostages. And so in that sense, the IDF are doing what they have to do.
They committed, indisputably, acts of genocide. They recorded these on GoPro videos. They sent them around the world through social media. And the atrocities that they committed, the slaughtering of families, the torture of families in front of each other, gang raping of women, mutilation of individuals, in particular sexual mutilation, all of this was very openly with the intention of targeting Jews because they were Jews, and so that intentional aspect of the acts of genocide was met there. So it's an inversion by blaming the victims of the very crimes that were perpetrated against them. But it's also based on a whole series of misinformation of what has been happening on the ground in Gaza over the last 12 months. And this is certainly in part because of what we have seen over our television screens. The images coming out of Gaza have been horrific, but they have not been presented in any way in their proper context. Now, part of that context is that no information comes out of Gaza that is not controlled by Hamas. Hamas still controls Gaza absolutely. Israel has been engaging Hamas and other Palestinian terrorists through various different geographical areas in Gaza, but it has not maintained control of any of those sectors. And what everyone outside of that part of the world needs to very much bear in mind is that no journalist, no international organization, no humanitarian, no doctor is able to report what is happening on the ground in Gaza in any way that Hamas, an internationally prescribed terrorist organization, do not approve of. So the first thing is what we're seeing coming out of the Gaza Strip is undeniably Hamas propaganda, but it has then been embraced, and it goes through a process, I think, when it gets channeled through international media, social media, certainly into the protest movement, of being filtered into this vehemently anti-Israel narrative. And that's where you get this false information, for example, that Israel is targeting civilians.
So I suppose from that vantage point, this is why Israel must do what it does, and this is why Israel is being demonized by a world outside that either doesn't understand or has no interest in understanding. It has an agenda to keep us clueless about what Israel is up against, and why Israel has to do what it does. As for Mark Perlmutter,
in a July 2024 piece in Politico about his spring trip to Gaza, American doctor Mark Perlmutter described an increase in bombing runs after sunset. We noticed that bombing seemed to peak at Iftar, when families were gathered together to break the fast during Ramadan with whatever food they had available. Most of the bombardment was directed at empty buildings, but when an inhabited one was hit, we'd see a flood of casualties. Speaking to Turkish television in October, his account of those same airstrikes changed completely.
I was there during Ramadan, the meal at the end of Ramadan, Iftar. Right before Iftar, the drones would be more audible, clearly visualizing where people were congregating, and the bombs would concentrate in those areas. The effectiveness of a non-discriminate 2,000-pound American bomb on a collection of women and children is much more impactful if you know where the people are collecting.
So, within 3 months, Perlmutter's story went from bombs hitting mostly empty buildings to charging that every strike carefully targeted women and children. Perlmutter isn't just a fabulist, as his incompatible stories of Israeli bombings show. He's also an extremist. He's called Zionism the moral equivalent of Nazism.
The targeting of healthcare workers is nothing that's new, but it's not our problem. The real issue is what's happening to healthcare workers within Gaza.
Yes.
There's still 350 healthcare workers imprisoned in Israel. Israel bemoans their own hostages, but they don't give a hoot about the 10,000 prisoners that they took. We call them prisoners on this side of the border. They're hostages on the other side, but they're the same. They're all absconded without committing any crimes. I have an orthopedic surgeon colleague here who was taken out of the operating room. His fingers were crushed. They showed him a picture of his wife from a spy, not from a magazine or an old photo, and it had a metadata and said it was taken the day before, up close, and said, we're going to bring her here in front of you, and we're going to gang rape her in front of you if you don't admit that you're Hamas, or we'll keep breaking your fingers. He still didn't admit he was Hamas, and they said, well, then we're going to send a drone through your bedroom window and incinerate your children, and he still wouldn't admit he was Hamas.
you know what? I take it back. The guy is full of shit. That is just unbelievable. That is just beyond. I don't believe a word of that shite. I just don't. So, you know. So much for the benefit of the doubt there, I suppose.
Every step that Israel has taken in the Gaza Strip has been gone through by lawyers to ensure that it is compliant with international law, that it targets legitimate military targets, either combatants or terrorist infrastructure, and that there is a proportionality analysis conducted in relation to each strike that is taken, each military maneuver, to ensure that the military aims of that strike are proportionate to any expected civilian collateral damage, to use the military technical term.